Hi, welcome to Catholic Saints. My name is Mary McGeehan. I work here at the Augustine Institute, and today I am joined on this episode with Dr. Liz Klein. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I was going to ask, what are your specialties here as a professor? What do you teach on?
I teach the Fathers and the Creed and the Sacraments.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. On this episode of Catholic Saints, we're going to talk and learn about the life of St Malachy of Armagh.
And we apologize in advance to any Gaelic speakers or Irish people for pronouncing his name probably wrong. But I'm pretty sure it is Malachy, but Armagh.
We don't know, but
We're
thank
not
you.
entirely sure. And so Mary actually emailed me up at the beginning of this year asking which saints I might want to do for this show. And I said, I wanted to do some Irish, English, and Scottish saints because there wasn't that many of them, but I mostly studied the Fathers. So St. Malachy was a real stretch for me because he's 12th century.
Okay.
And so this is about 400 to 500 years after anything that I really read about. So it was a bit of a stretch doing St. Malachy, and I read his life that we'll talk about, written by St. Bernard of Clairvaux, and I thought I was just going to tear through it, and there was a whole bunch of things I was like, wait, what? They did what? What is this? And so I had to go find out what was going on in Ireland at the time, and I hope to share that with you because it's very interesting stuff. So
Yes.
The dates of St. Malachy, he lived from 1094 to 1138. His feast day is November the 3rd.
Okay.
And he is remembered as a great reformer of Ireland. So you might wonder what needed to be reformed in Ireland in the 12th century.
Yes, what was going on?
So in the 12th century, Ireland had been kind of cut off from the continent for around 200 years because of Viking raids. And a lot of the monasteries and centers of learning had kind of been destroyed. Some of the more ancient things, if you listen or watch a lot of these episodes, you might have heard about Iona and Lindisfarne and these kind of, big important monasteries in and near Ireland. A lot of those were destroyed by Vikings. And so there's been kind of a disconnect in information. And so it seems that there's been a lot of local kind of habits cropping up. And it wasn't entirely clear, and I don't know that we actually know all the details of how things were in Ireland. But I thought I would just read one little section from the life
And one
of St. Malachy. Yeah, go
quick
ahead.
question: Why were the Vikings threatened by these Catholic communities? Why were they wanting to destroy or oppress?
I just think Vikings like to destroy and steal things.
It's in their blood.
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, I mean, this is actually
It's who they are.
Well, if you read anything from the ancient period or the medieval period, I mean, there's just a lot of kings killing each other, people fighting each other, stealing other people's property.
Yes, it was the
taking
time
each other
period.
as slaves. I mean, this is pretty common. But
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't know any familiarity exactly about specifically
No, that's
Viking
helpful.
animosity towards Catholics, although I'm sure it was there because they fought them for a long time.
Yes.
Okay, so just to give a bit of background to what I'm about to read, St. Malachy was said to be kind of a very pious child. He took it upon himself to be mentored by a kind of local hermit ascetic. And so he is ordained at 25, which is actually much earlier than he really was supposed to be ordained, and was elected bishop at 30.
Wow.
And so he's a bishop at age 30, and he kind of shows up to the Episcopal See. And this is how the description is of what he finds. So it says, when he began to administer his office, the man of God understood that he had been sent not to men, but to beasts. Never before had he known the like in whatever depth of barbarism. Never had he found men so shameless in regard of morals, so dead in regard of rights, so impious in regard of faith, so barbarous in regard of laws, so stubborn in regard of discipline, so unclean in regard to life. They were Christian in name, in fact, pagans. There was no giving of tithes or first fruits, no entry into lawful marriages, no making of confessions. Nowhere could be found any who would either seek penance or impose it. Ministers of the altar were exceedingly few, but indeed what need was there of more when even the few were almost in idleness and ease among the laity.
Wow.
So,
Not great times for
if
the
you
church.
think of today and bemoan that nobody goes to confession and that we're not having that many vocations and that people are getting married outside the church unaware of proper marriage laws in the church, it seems that is very much the case that St. Malachy is walking into. So I read this and I was like, okay, well, this is a very good lesson to begin with when we're studying anything in church history. I think it can be easy for anyone in any time period to think that the problems we're facing are the worst they've ever been or they're unique. And of course, every time has its own challenges. But in the history of the church, there's been lots of times when things have not been great and things have been lapsed. And
Yes.
people in the past, although they were generally maybe more religious than they are today, people have always been capable of living as if there is no God and living a lawless life and living without morality. This is always a choice that requires conversion. There is no like golden age of history where everybody is sort of a pious, God-fearing individual. It's just like
Humans are still humans.
yeah, this is kind of like not the case. So I read this passage and I thought that was just really interesting and almost kind of comical.
Yes.
But then as it was going on, St. Bernard mentions that there were laymen holding the office of bishop but without orders. And I was like, sorry, what? I was like, it doesn't even make any sense. You can't be a bishop without orders. So this was my attempt. I was like, oh, I'm just going to read this life really like quickly and find out all this stuff about St. Malachy. And I was like, okay, I have to like read the footnotes and figure out what's going on. So apparently it was an Irish custom, and this is mentioned by Bede a little bit, that a certain ecclesiastical area would be not governed so much by the bishop as by an abbot. And so you kind of had a division sort of between like ecclesiastical authority, which rested with the abbot, and ecclesiastical dignity, which rested with the bishop. So obviously a bishop is the only one who can ordain. And often abbots were bishops, but not always. Okay, so this is kind of the case in some places, but it seems like at least in the place where Malachy is, maybe elsewhere in Ireland, there were laymen, married laymen with children holding this office of abbot, or what they called a cohort. So you have married men holding this kind of ecclesiastical authority office and even passing it on to their children.
Wow.
So by the time Malachy takes over, he's bishop. Well, it's a little unclear if he's bishop or abbot and exactly how that all works. But there's a priest, a bishop named Celsus, who wants to kind of end this chain of married abbots who then pass the office on to their children.
One quick question.
Yep, go
What
ahead.
do you mean by the bishop, the authority versus the dignity?
Right. So
attributed
I mean that the abbots would have done things like, I don't know, would have been in charge of like the church's finances and would have been in charge of maybe like which priest was in which church or whatever. Like they had like the sort of administrative authority, but they couldn't ordain because they weren't bishops.
Yes, okay.
So a bishop still had the ecclesiastical dignity of being able to ordain
in his priesthood.
and the fullness of ordination.
Thank you.
Because these lay abbots, they weren't ordained. They weren't even priests. So you have the bishop before Malachy, whose name is Celsus. He wants to put an end to this. So after he gets the office inherited from his father, he lives celibate. He is ordained a bishop. So he's both bishop and abbot or cohort, and passes the office on to Malachy. So this is breaking the chain of just passing it on to your sons. So this puts Malachy in quite a difficult position because he's trying to break this chain of behavior, apparently over 200 years, of the church being governed in a different way and trying to bring it in conformity with the rest of the Catholic world, where the bishop is in charge of a diocese.
Okay, fascinating. In a lawless culture in time with a lot of adversity, only at the age 30 as well.
Yeah, so, and this like kind of characterizes the whole life. He has a lot of involvement in politics in very difficult political situations. So here he is trying to be the bishop of this area, and there's a kind of usurper who wants to go back to the old way and like kind of have the family member inherit the office. He like steals this like staff, this like golden staff, and the insignias of office, and is like going around the countryside saying like he's in charge. And so like, Malachy is trying to like take over and trying to kind of assert that the office of bishop also involves administration of the church and isn't just kind of like a dignity of office by which you're ordained. Anyway, this is all very complicated. And this just happens when, like, if you read the Wikipedia article of a saint like I do, it says like, oh, he's an ecclesiastical reformer in Ireland and he was the bishop of such and such a place. And I'm like, great. And then I get to reading the life and you're like, actually, this is really, really complicated. And it's hard being so distant from the time period to kind of reconstruct how difficult the political situation was. But it seems to me in that it's like a very important lesson because you can be a saint in very difficult political circumstances and be following the Lord. But this takes a lot of patience and time. And yeah, a lot of non-ideal circumstances have presided in the past this seems like a lot worse situation than I'm aware of in recent church history that he had to deal with. So he does this. He succeeds in kind of putting his diocese in order in getting people to tithe, go to confession, have lawful marriages, putting the bishop kind of back in charge of the see. But Malachy goes further than that, and he's trying to kind of put the whole Church of Ireland in order. And so he becomes the papal legate.
What does that
travels
mean?
to Rome. So it means that he is the one who is responsible for communicating between the Church of Ireland and Rome.
Okay. The liaison.
Yes.
Yes.
The
okay.
liaison between Ireland and Rome. And so trying to kind of give the Irish Church its own autonomy, not under England, not just kind of, it's like its own thing. So trying to make it actually have the proper organization in order to do that. Because if you have these kind of bishops who aren't in charge, there are more bishops than there are dioceses, confusing stuff's happening. And so he goes to Rome to get the Pope to give them an archbishopric, to give them like a primacy so that they have their own kind of Irish church. So that's what he heads to Rome to do. And that is how he meets Bernard of Clairvaux.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, she was mentioning she was going to read from St. Bernard of Clairvaux, who wrote about the life of St. Malachy. I was like, how do they know each other? One lives in Ireland, one's in France, I believe. How did their paths even cross?
Yes. And so I actually thought the same thing because, as I said, 12th century Ireland is not my main area of expertise. So I was like, oh, Bernard wrote his life. That's so amazing. Because if you're not familiar with Bernard of Clairvaux, he was a very powerful churchman in this time, a monastic reformer, and he is a doctor of the church called the mellifluous doctor. Who's
a great adjective.
Honey sweet doctor. Wow. So to have someone who has honeyed words write your life, that's a good thing. So yeah, so this life, if you want to go read it, it's actually free online. St. Bernard's Life of St. Malachy. You can just Google it. It's on like Project Gutenberg. It's free. It's a translation from the 1920s, and it is mellifluous. It's very beautifully written. Like you cannot even believe the number of scriptural citations that Bernard kind of just like weaves into it.
Wow.
Okay, so this is how he meets Bernard is because he's on his way to Rome. He stops in Clairvaux. Why does he stop in Clairvaux? Because the Pope is powerful and all, but monastics have a certain power and authority of their own, and St. Bernard is one of the most respected, most powerful churchmen. So he stops to get St. Bernard's blessing on his mission so that he can tell the Pope, I have been to Bernard, and Bernard agrees with me. In fact, the Pope after Malachy, the next one, I can't remember the name of the Pope that he's going to see, but Pope Eugenius III is the one after, was actually one of Bernard's students and monks.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a lot of power connection between Clairvaux and Rome. So that's how he meets Bernard.
Okay.
So he stops on the way to Rome. Go ahead.
They become good friends, apparently.
They become good friends, apparently. And St. Malachy stops there twice. So he goes to Rome twice. And on his return home, the second time he dies at Clairvaux with St. Bernard.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is deep friendship.
Yeah, so there's a really beautiful description of St. Malachy's death that St. Bernard was actually present at the end of this life. And we're kind of jumping ahead to the end of life. That's okay. It's very beautiful. And St. Malachy foretold his death in a sense, because people asked him, like, if you could have your pick, when would you die and how would you die? And he said he would die in Clairvaux on All Souls Day. And he did. He died in Clairvaux on All Souls Day, which is, I don't know that in of itself, that's a kind of cool piety to want to die on All Souls Day. It's not like the day I would pick necessarily. I'd be like Easter Sunday after I've been to Mass, make sure everything's like checked out.
Right.
But he wants to die on the day that he knows that souls are going to be prayed for. And so there's a kind of humility, not on All Saints Day, wants to die on All Souls Day.
Yeah, no, that is a beautiful depiction of humility. I didn't think about that.
And so he's actually ended up being buried beside Bernard in the same place. And then after the dissolutions of the monastery in France, their relics are kind of mixed, apparently. So I thought that was a really cool image of the whole thing, the fact that Bernard wrote his life and that Malachy is trying to like set Ireland in order and trying to go to Rome to find out what they're supposed to do is also a really beautiful image of the Catholicity of the church. And obviously these are two very different people, but they were able to speak to each other in Latin, presumably, because they're trained so. A lot of travel, a lot of division, really, and difficulty in the church, and yet two people who got along well and helped each other in their missions and exchanged letters and ultimately are buried together. And so to have this great Irish reformer kind of buried with this great French monastic, I don't know, I just think that's a cool image of the church.
Great sign of unity, solidarity, and also just that notion of God raises saints not alone in pairs or in some form of community, that they were able to, in small ways, encourage each other in their particular missions.
And St. Bernard, I'm sure, was a great encouragement to St. Malachy because it can't have been easy. I mean, this is a really big project to undergo. Some of the historians call this not a kind of Irish revolution because of the difficulty in overcoming the differences in customs, either that both existed before, but then grew even greater kind of after this separation from other Catholics. And there's a group of Irish churchmen who want to come into conformity with Rome, but I'm sure that wasn't everybody. And so this very great difficulty of overcoming a lot of inertia and local custom, and apparently people who have really fallen away from the practice of their faith.
Yes, and the tradition. And the culture is so contagious too. It seems as if it's popular culture piety, it almost spreads pervasively in a negative way. You did mention though he was successful in creating some reform. Can you elaborate more on did the Pope grant his request?
Yes.
What were some of the consequences?
Right. So he was. I mean, Bernard doesn't go into a lot of detail on how he exactly achieved this, but he apparently was successful in gaining control of his diocese, having bishops be the kind of ruler in their own diocese, although he didn't do that by himself, obviously, in reestablishing regular confession, regular marriages, and sort of the general morality and setup of the laity, that he was successful. And yes, he was successful in making Armagh, where is named for, the sort of primacy of all Ireland and the seat of the Irish Church. So this is actually true today, which I did not know. This is actually still the head of the Irish Church is in Armagh, which is a town of 15,000 people. It's not very big, but because of the historical importance of the city, and that's where the Pope granted sort of the primacy of Ireland to reside. That's still where the head of the Irish Church resides, and it's in Northern Ireland today.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So apparently there was a long heated debate between Dublin and Armagh, but Armagh won out, even though it's now a very small city. Yes. So there's like two giant cathedrals in this small town, 15,000 people.
And ironically, it is in the northern part of the Ireland that is now more traditionally Protestant.
Yes, yeah, so it's still there, and that's still considered sort of the papal legate, the liaison from the Pope to Ireland, still resides in.
Let's go on a pilgrimage there. That sounds wonderful. Maybe.
That sounds great. I think there's a lot of pilgrimages that could come out of these Celtic saints.
True.
Yeah, another one of the saints that I did from the same kind of region, Northumbria, Cuthbert. Apparently there's like a Cuthbert's Way that has a pilgrimage. So maybe we can make a St Malachy Way. Make pilgrimage from Armagh to Rome.
I mean, it sounds like a very important location, is what I'm hearing.
Stop in Clairvaux.
Yeah. Yes. Visit their grave site.
I'm not sure if I think their relics are dispersed now.
Okay.
Because of, history of relics in France, but apparently mixed.
Yes.
So maybe we can go see them both.
We touched on a lot of spiritual applications already with his life, looking to him for inspiration for our own today, especially that encouragement in times of adversity. Don't feel as if it is this novel part of time in history that often we have saints who have overcome similar situations that we might be in today. Are there other spiritual applications or, legacies that he has gifted the church by his life today?
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, the Catechism says that the church is always in need of reform. And I think it's easy for us to say that, but not actually intuit it, and to have a really healthy sense of the fact that the church is the result of the divine will of God. God makes the church, but it's also full of human beings, and that we need to really be vigilant about the church, about what's going on in the church, and never go into the lazy idea of there's just some perfect time that we can return to. And if we just went back to that, everything would be perfect. That we live in time, we're creatures of time and space, and the church is always in need of a reform and a renewal of her identity in every successive age. And that also often takes a lifetime and really heroic effort on the part of someone like St Malachy, the number of kings he dealt with and nobles and other bishops and the traveling that he did, I think it's the case that he died maybe before he even saw the archbishopric established in Ireland, even though it was his work. And that's so often the case with our own lives and with the lives of the saints, that what they labor for, we in retrospect can see what heroic and great work it was, but in its own time is often very thankless, and we don't often see the fruits that we would like to see from it.
Yes.
Often in retrospect, we can see, he did reform Ireland. Yeah.
And if I'm hearing this properly, his life and a lot of what he reformed, it is interesting how through hierarchical organization was greater freedom for the church and greater devotion. And so sometimes that's just a a thought that, or a principle that our world doesn't believe, that in hierarchy can lead to freedom.
Yes,
I know
absolutely.
simplification of that.
Yes,
but
don't underestimate the institutional church.
Yes.
Like it does, there are lots of problems with the institutional church. Institutions can be abused. People in power can abuse their power, absolutely. But when you don't have an institutional structure, it's chaos and people can't thrive. You can't have vocations. You can't have priests at the right parishes. You can't have people getting married properly if nobody knows the rules and nobody's like quite in charge. And yeah, I think that we can... Yeah, institution has like a very bad kind of name now, but there is a reason that Jesus founded his church on a particular people and gave it like a management system, because human beings can't really thrive apart from it.
Right, in the chaos, yes. And that reminder that we are sent to a particular time and place for a particular mission by the Lord, to take encouragement in that.
Even if we think, why do I live in this country? Why do I live at this time? Why are with these people who are more beasts, more men than beasts, apparently, according to St Malachy. But he loved them and he served them and he got everything in order. So the gift of administration is a gift that I think is often unseen. But if you've ever worked for a good administrator, you know what an amazing blessing this is, that God can give his church people who know how to get the paperwork done, know how to process things correctly at Rome, know how to have a well-run ship, because that makes everybody else thrive.
It is true. Very true. Thank you. Is there any other nuggets as you were reading the life that you wanted to share?
No, if you want to read a very beautifully written life, go look up the Life of St. Malachy by Bernard of Clairvaux and see if you like it.
Yes, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your research and reflection on this saint. Thank you for joining. And St. Malachy, pray for us.